Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be doing my bookshelf tour. So I first said back in February that I was planning on doing a bookshelf tour, and I mentioned it in a few media of the moment videos. I mentioned that I was planning on doing it, I then mentioned that I had filmed it, and then I mentioned that I was in the editing phase, and then I never mentioned it again. Essentially, I ended up moving some stuff around on my shelves, and then I got more books, so stuff got added to the shelves, and I didn't want to do an outdated tour, and then I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so it all got confused, and now, more than 2 months later, here I am without a bookshelf tour still. So finally, I decided what I wanted to do with my bookshelf tour, and that is to kind of do a general, broad, big picture organization bookshelf tour. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm not going to be pulling out every single book on my shelves. Instead, I am going to be showing you both of these bookcases and my small bookcase, showing you shelf by shelf how I organize things, maybe pointing out specific series, but not going book by book, pulling them out and showing every single one to you. And that's mostly because I'm going to be moving in a couple weeks, and this arrangement of my shelves that I just hit is not going to be in place for much longer. So I would rather do a very in-depth, detailed bookshelf tour once I get a little bit more settled in my apartment in the fall. So this video right now is just going to be shelf by shelf, the organization of my bookshelves. You'll get to see all the books on my shelves, but you just won't see me pulling out every single one of them and naming every single one of them. But like I said, I do plan on doing a more detailed tour once I get settled in the fall, and I will be pulling out every single book and going book by book, naming every single one in that video. But since these shelves will only be intact for about 2 more weeks, I decided that I didn't want to get too detailed with it this time. So I'm going to start out with a general overview of the organization of both of these and my smaller shelf, and then I'm going to go shelf by shelf on all of them and show you a more detailed, more in-depth look at my organization and just generally what books and series I have on my shelf. So I'm going to start out with the basic organization of all of my bookshelves before I jump into any sort of detailed organization. So these are my 2 main bookshelves that you see here. The main organization of these is that this shelf over here has all of my TBR books, so those are all the books that I have not read. And this shelf right here has all of my read books. So these are all the books that I own and that I have read. However, on this bottom shelf is where I do keep all of my comics and my manga and my graphic novels. So sometimes there are some books down there that I have not read, but in general I tend to read all of those as soon as I get them. So that sometimes does have some books that I haven't read, but in general, this shelf right here is just books that I have read. So now we moved over to my smaller bookshelf. This is basically where I keep my magazines on the bottom and some nonfiction books on the top. So now I'm going to be giving you a slightly more in-depth look at both these shelves and my smaller bookshelf. Since this isn't an extremely in-depth bookshelf tour, I'm not going to be pulling out every single book, but I am going to be giving you a more detailed look at the shelves, how I organize them, and some of the books and series that I do own. So starting at the very top of my bookshelves, I have the 2 wands that I got this summer at Harry Potter World. This one is just a basic wood wand. It's not a specific character wand. It is the reed wand. I got it because I thought that the personality attached with the wood type matches my personality. And then this one over here is Sirius Black's wand because I like him as a character and because I thought his wand was super cool. Okay, so we're going to be starting the more detailed organization of my bookshelves at the top of my TBR shelf. So this top shelf consists of the fantasy series that I am most excited to get to. So these are the fantasy series that are at the top of my TBR. Over here on the left, we have first books and series where I don't have the rest of the series. And then I have the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor, the first and third books in the Falling Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes, books 1, 3, and 4 in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, and Words of Radiance, which is book 2 in the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. So now I move down to the second shelf on my TBR shelf. In the middle here is my TBR stack. These are the books that I use every month to do my TBR stack challenge. Right now there's an extra book in here just because I have not read it yet for my challenge this month. And then the rest of these books that are on this shelf are continuations of series. Most of these are second books in series, but essentially for all of these I have started the series and this is the next book I need to read or the next 2 books that I need to read in the series. And then right here I have my TBR jar, which has little slips of paper in it, and these slips of paper are all the books that I can pull for my TBR stack challenge. So now I move down to the 3rd shelf on my TBR shelf, which as you can see is mostly fantasy series. Trial by Fire is kind of on its own over here at the end, but once you get past this one, you get into some of the middle grade fantasy with Percy Jackson and the Olympian series by Rick Riordan, and The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. And then we get into some adult high fantasy here at the end with the entirety of the Codex Alera by Jim Butcher and the first 3 books in the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. And now we move down to the 4th shelf on this bookcase, which is mostly just the runover of the series that I have not read. With most of these, I do not own the entirety of the series. For some of these, it's like the first book in the series that I own, or I own the first 2 books in the series. I think the only full series that I have on this shelf is the Pathfinders trilogy by Orson Scott Card. And then here at the end, I have my package of puking pastels that I got at Harry Potter World. And then behind that is where I keep any bookmarks that I have. And then finally, we've moved down to the bottom of my TBR shelf where I have all of my unread standalones. Now there are a couple exceptions, aka Illuminae, which is not a standalone, but that's just kind of where I ended up putting it, and I've never fixed that. But these are all standalones that I own that I have not read. So I start out over here on the left with some literary fiction, and then I go into some dystopia and some fantasy, and then into some sci-fi, and then at the end I have Landline by Rainbow Rowell, which is a contemporary. So now we're up at the top of my red shelf, where as you can see I only have 2 series, and those are the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling and the Pendragon series by D.J. McHale. I mostly keep these up here at the top because they fit really well on the shelf together, but they do also happen to be 2 of my favorite series of all time. Also at the top here I have a bottle of You Know Pooh, which I also got at Harry Potter World. This really stuck with me when it showed up in book 6 of the Harry Potter series, and so when I saw this at Harry Potter World, I had to get it and put it on my bookshelves. So now we move down to the 2nd shelf on my red bookcase, which has most of my favorite series on it. Starting on the left, we have the Across the Universe trilogy by Beth Revis, the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, the 2 books that are out of the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon, the entirety of the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare, and books 2 and 6 in the Mortal Instrument series by Cassandra Clare, and I only have these 2 because the rest of my copies of the series are at home. And I actually do kind of organize these in a specific way. On the one hand, I have kind of the more sci-fi over here and the fantasy over here, but I also have it so that the ones that I like the most can be seen most easily in my shots when I'm filming. So when I stand here, I kind of cover up these 2 a little bit, but these 2 are pretty prominent, and these 2 are some of my favorite series of all time, whereas these are slightly lower. So that's just a fun little tidbit for y'all. So now we move down once again to the 3rd shelf on my bookcase, which has most of the rest of this series that I have read. So from the Diviners over, these are like first books in a series where I either don't have the rest of the series or I haven't read any more books in the series. And from Hollow City over this way, these are books where I have either completed the series or I've read all the books that I own from that series. And with the series on the shelf, I actually have it organized by favorites. So I start over here with the Ascendance trilogy by Jennifer A. Nielsen, and then to the Hunger Games trilogy by Suzanne Collins, and then to the Divergent trilogy by Veronica Roth, the Shatter Me trilogy by Taheda Mafi with Untie Me in the middle here, and then over to the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children series by Ransom Riggs, of which I have the first 2 books. And I'm not sure why I have these 2 here, because I definitely like these better than at least Shatter Me and possibly the Divergent trilogy, but I guess I put these here because I don't have the full trilogy. I'm not really sure about that decision, but this is where they've been for quite a while. And like I said, the books from the Diviners over are all first books in a series where I either haven't continued the series or I don't own the rest of the series, or in the case of The Rhythmist by Brandon Sanderson, the rest of the series isn't out. And I actually organize these mostly by genre, starting with paranormal and then into like sci-fi dystopian and then just fantasy from here over. So now we move down one more shelf to the 4th shelf on this bookcase, which is most of my read standalones. So organize this shelf mostly based on genre, starting over here with some fantasy, then going into sci-fi and dystopian, and then into literary fiction, mystery, and nonfiction. And then of course at the end here I have my chocolate frog that I got at Harry Potter World this summer, and the card in here is Dumbledore. And finally, we have moved down to the last shelf on my red bookcase, which is split up into two different parts. Over here on the left, we have my standalone contemporary novels that I have read, and over on the right, we have all of the comics, manga, and graphic novels that I own. So with the contemporaries, I actually have them organized by lighter versus darker contemporaries, with the lighter contemporaries over here and the darker contemporaries over here. And then over here with the manga, graphic novels, and comics, I have them mostly organized by which format they are and then by genre within that. So over here I obviously have my manga, starting with the entirety of the Death Note Black Editions by Tsugumi Ohba, and then I have the First and the Infernal Devices manga series, and then I have the first volume of the Scott Pilgrim graphic novel series, and then I move into mostly comics, except for Through the Woods, which I guess should technically be next to Scott Pilgrim, but this is where I've placed it. So with the comics, I mostly have them organized by genre, starting with horror right here, and then The Sandman, which I guess could be categorized as either fantasy or horror, then into sci-fi with the Saga comic series, and then I have the first volumes of both Chew and The Fade Out. And then at the end, I just have a couple random books that happen to have visual elements, which are The Amazing Book is Not on Fire by Dan and Phil, and the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone illustrated edition that came out last year. So now we move over to my small bookshelf where I have mostly textbooks and nonfiction books and like fill-in books. So I start over here with more textbooks. These three are books that I had for class. Then I go into some more just like music books, music history or German for musicians, and then into some music psych and some psych books. And then I just put the feminine mystique at the end because it really didn't fit into any of those categories. And then at the end, I just have some like fill-in books like lists or things to write about or write this journal. So anything that you write in or draw in, and then of course my project draw in my book at the end. And then very briefly, I have my last shelf, which as you can see are all magazines or journals. Everything from the beginning of the shelf until right here are alternative press. I think they start December 12 of 2012 and then they go through October of 2015. I had a subscription for a while, but I stopped because I stopped pulling out the posters. So I just briefly stopped. I'll probably start again because I do love this magazine, but these are all alt press. And then this little section right here is all QuizFest magazines. This is a magazine that I've gotten since almost it started. It started in like 2004, and I don't think I have the first edition of it, but like I have almost every single magazine that they've come out with. So that's kind of a fun fact. So that is it for this bookshelf tour. I hope that you enjoyed getting a more detailed look at these shelves and the shelves that you don't normally see. That being said, I do hope to get a more detailed bookshelf tour up sometime in the fall, but who knows if that'll happen because I wanted to do that last fall, and now I'm finally making a bookshelf tour. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!